In this lesson, we're going to talk about ways to combat anger. And there are 6 ways that we're going to go over, but we're only going to cover the first 4 in this lesson. So I want you to put on your experimenter's hat, and we are going to look at the ways to combat our parasitic anger. So we're going to learn how to overcome a harmful anger cycle, learn why expelling tension from anger through cathartic yelling and throwing things reinforces that tendency to feel angry, how to bring the excesses out of the parasitic forms of blame and escape the blame trap, how to avoid what is called a fundamental attribution error, the importance of appraising a situation or person from a different angle to avoid jumping to conclusions, or making sure that we're reading things accurately, and also experiencing less needless anger. We're going to cover how adopting a philosophy of acceptance helps you better tolerate an aversive situation, and how to be in command of yourself and improve your ability to respond proportionately, and why when you pursue an enlightened self-interest, you're going to have fewer needless anger episodes. But those last 2 we're going to cover in the next lesson. But before we delve into these 6 anger combating strategies, it's important to understand what a harmful anger cycle is. So reducing or ridding yourself of a parasitic belief starts with becoming aware of those thinking traps. A parasitic form of anger is a cyclical process that's triggered by undesired events, and it's colored by negative, irrational beliefs with the power to stimulate emotional arousal and behavioral responses, including aggression. And you can take charge of yourself to change the process and break this cycle by really guiding your reason to achieve that end. And this strategy, as you're going to learn in these groups, is going to help you do that. So the anger cycle, the event happens, then we have the negative appraisal, then we have this arousal of emotion. And because our emotions are aroused, then we have a behavior that follows, and that's followed by emotive and behavioral consequences. So in the classic movie in 1976, Network, we hear the angry man TV newscaster played by Howard Beale. He was venting. He says, "I don't have to tell you that things were bad. Punks are running wild in the streets. We know the air is unfit to breathe and our food is unfit to eat." And then when he finishes griping, he asks the audience to stick their heads out the window and yell, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." So Beale's solution here is a catharsis solution, yelling out the window. And catharsis is a common anger solution. You act to relieve yourself of anger tensions by pounding on a pillow or slamming a door or throwing a dish or screaming or ranting and raving. And we have to ask, is this an effective way to defeat the needless anger? And some off the beaten path therapy systems involve, screaming and lots of it. Psychiatrist Dan Kazariel in 1974, he authored the book Scream Away from Happiness. He created this system where people screamed to release tension, but there's no meaningful evidence for that approach. And then there's a California psychiatrist, Arthur Janov, in 1975, wrote Primal Scream Therapy. There's a new one out that he wrote, and I've put the picture here. But this is a pseudoscience system, and it really lacks empirical support. It does have a short-term placebo effect for some people, but some of Janov's beliefs are unconventional and controversial. He says that, primal pain can start before or just at birth, and that screaming about these experiences can be really curative. And there's a couple of other authors out there that, have descriptions of effectiveness, but the primal scream therapy floats untethered in this really unethereal world. And a lot of people, even those normally with calm temperaments, occasionally vent. And it's hardly fatal to vent, but venting is different from expressing your feelings, like saying, "You know what, I feel sad," or "I felt angry when you acted dismissively towards me." Emotional expression is typically healthy. But on the flip side of that, discharging the tension by kicking and screaming, that's temper tantrum stuff that you can dignify by the word catharsis. And unfortunately, anger catharsis normally does more long-term harm than good. Instead of relief, you're going to feel more riled up and worse for a longer period of time. Catharsis is rarely an answer for anger. It is better to scream or hit a wall than to kick a pet or beat a child or get into physical fights, though. So we want to try a different way to discharge our anger tension, like exercise. After 30 minutes of exercise, we have more oxygenated blood, and that goes to the brain for a few hours. So you're likely to think with greater clarity about the matters that you want to resolve. There's different provocative situations that are going to take different approaches for discharging the tension that results from the anger. So sometimes a strong assertion is reasonable, and other times listening before you act makes sense. Altering changeable parts of an environment, also removing yourself from the toxic setting can be effective. And sometimes your response would be best directed at diffusing the anger-evoking parasitic belief. So here the idea is not to find a middle ground, but to find ways to overthrow a dysfunctional parasitic belief. We live in this blame culture. And that's very nested in the age of anger. Blame and anger, it's like the air, it's everywhere. But holding people responsible for their actions is socially functional. Blame excesses, extensions of blame, and exonerations are typically problematic. So you're kind of commonly find these big three blame factors in parasitic anger patterns. Blame excesses include like fault finding, nitpicking, and complaining. You put on your defect detection glasses and we're identifying a defect or a mistake in another person. And we're seeing ourselves as justified in blaming that person, and then we're getting angry over what the person did that displeased you. With extension of blame, we're extending blame when we are demeaning or putting down or damning yourself or others or life. And these extension of blame attitudes or ideas include dehumanizing other people or depersonalizing others. So this might be like declaring that the person is a scumbag or an idiot or a bitch, a bastard, a creep, or whatever. And when you degrade others, you believe that you are superior and you have the right to harm them. So these extensions of blame are a major anger generating force. And then the blame exonerations are just defenses against blame. A lot of people prefer to have this reputation and a positive public image. And blame affects how people think of you. So you engage in this ego-preserving defense that includes rationalizations and denials and deflections. So an example of just this classic extension of blame, I don't know if you remember this, but the Nevada Supreme Court removed a juvenile court judge, Richard Deacon Jones, for improper conduct. He included the use of extreme and threatening language. So Deacon Jones had just created a squabble with another judge, Jane Prochaska. And the problem started when Jones accused Prochaska of being derelict in her duties. So Jones, figuratively, made a federal case of something that was probably none of his business. But according to the court records, Jones spoke of putting dynamite in the tailpipe of her car and burying her in the sand up to her head and pouring honey over her head and putting ants on her head. And Jones justified his actions by calling Prochaska, quote, a fucking bitch. He even put lit firecrackers and threw them in her office. And so Presumably, Jones' arbitrary description of Prochaska's character justified in his mind the atrocities that he was thinking of. But the Supreme Court justices kind of had a different view, and Jones lost his position. So here you can see Deacon Jones and Jane Prochaska, and we don't know what transpired behind the beginning of this, but I'm pretty sure that he had some sort of extension of blame view towards Miss Prochaska. So parasitic anger, it's like parasitic anxiety or depression or whatever. It has a distinctive pattern of thought, and we call that distinctive pattern a cognitive signature. So a cognitive signature is just a predictable line of thought that goes with anger or anxiety or depressive conditions. And it could go with any other thing. So, for example, a common cognitive signature for depression is helplessness and hopelessness. And anxiety's signature includes anticipation of threat and powerlessness to cope. So parasitic anger signatures are varied, and they're going to include hostile thoughts like, if you don't give me what I want, I'm going to hurt you, or I should get my way, or there's going to be hell to pay. Or it might sound like, I hate you and I'm going to destroy you. So these parasitic cognitive signatures repeatedly lead to negative outcomes. So why not change them when you experience them? So I'll give you another example here. Jill acted badly towards Jack by joking about him in front of his friends. So what do you think? If you think Jill's a witch, then that is your attribution. You're thinking that she is a witch, so you're attributing that to her. Would we blame Jack for calling Jill a witch at that point? Probably not. But what if you learned that Jack had previously berated Jill for her hairstyle in front of her friends? Would you think Jack was a hypocrite? Would you consider Jill's response fair payback for what Jack had done? So the witch and the hypocrite are character generalizations that represent fundamental attribution errors. We're attributing things to other people erroneously. So you make a fundamental attribution error when you, the observer, jump to a conclusion and you heap blame on other people's based on your judgment of their character. So you could just as easily disagree with their choices. So a common fundamental attribution error is that, a child won't share a toy, so it makes the child a selfish, spoiled brat. Or a bank clerk miscounts the money and the error is in the bank's favor. So maybe we're thinking, well, the bank clerks are the real bank robbers. Or maybe somebody's talking too loudly in a restaurant, so you think that the person's being an inconsiderate jerk. And once you have degraded that person in your mind, or even out loud, you can justify retribution. But if we flip things around, what if you were the one who was talking too loudly? Or you told someone not to do something and then you went and did it yourself? Or you just made a calculation error. And if you made a calculation error, you're just likely to see that as situational. Maybe someone distracted you, or you lacked information, or you were just too stressed out to think straight. And people should understand that you're not perfect. So you exonerate yourself from the blame, and then you're able to move on. So anger attribution errors typically involve character generalizations, extensions of blame, and justifications for punishing. And when we flip it around, we develop empathy for another person's mistakes or faults in a situation, and it helps you to break out of that extension of blame habit. Empathy or feeling understanding for another person's situation, like putting yourself in the other person's shoes, is really incompatible with extension of blame thinking. So here are some examples of anger attributions involving extensions of blame And we can look in situations when you're the observer and in situations when you are the actor. So when you're the observer, you're in a hurry to get to an airport and maybe you get behind a driver that's in the passing lane going the speed limit. So you slow down and you can't get around the driver. So in your head, you're thinking, this guy's a selfish jerk and he's just trying to slow everybody down. And you're wishing that you had some sort of like cannon mounted on the hood of your car, and you think that would take care of that SOB. And if you had any doubts about how you felt, this extension of blame thinking is a parasitic anger way of thinking. But when we're in the actor, it's going to be a little bit different. So maybe you're the one driving the speed limit in the passing lane. You're thinking about your sick friend in the hospital or something, and you're not really watching your speedometer, and you're driving a little too slowly. And the driver behind you starts honking and flipping you off, and you're sitting here thinking, this guy didn't give me the benefit of the doubt. Instead, they thought you were intentionally slowing down traffic. So when we compare the two views, the extension of blame view, you're thinking the action's intentional, so you can blame and condemn. You think the act reflects the person's character or their disposition, and so it's blamable and condemnable. But if it's a personal situation, we see the matter as situational, so it's understandable and it's forgivable. Or you think the act is explainable by what happened to cause the event, and therefore it's understandable and forgivable. So it's all in how we're looking at things. I like to use the example of somebody cutting me off in traffic. So if someone cuts me off in traffic, I can either blame or I can use the personal situation view. So the extension of blame view would be, this guy's a jerk, he's intentionally cutting me off, he's being an aggressive driver, he's doing this on purpose. And I'm going to start getting angry. And remember, how we feel how we're thinking influences how we feel, and how we feel influences how we behave. So if I'm feeling angry, then I might behave in an angry way and honk or flip them off or yell expletives out the window, whatever. But if I look at this as a personal situation view, I've been in a situation like that where somebody was driving the speed limit or going too slowly, and I really, really had to go to the bathroom. So I cut them off. I didn't mean to be rude or aggressive. I just really had to go. And so now we can look at any situation where somebody does something like that, and we can just have in the back of our head, oh man, I really hope he finds a bathroom soon. So the next time you anger yourself over a stranger's behavior, try this comparison exercise. Compare the character generalizations that you might make of another person's actions with how you would like other people to view you in a similar circumstance. Then I want you to journal about what you're discovering from this experiment, and you can use that to support future reappraisals. Now let's do a visualization here. Imagine that you are walking on a crowded city sidewalk and you feel somebody bump into you as you pass by. And you're thinking, hey, that was intentional. And so your anger feelings are going to start to come up. And situations like this, where you jump to a conclusion, it's an opportunity to practice the cognitive reappraisal. Because this cognitive reappraisal is just really a technique for taking a second look at a situation to really see if you can amend the meaning and wring out any of the excess. The idea here isn't to fool yourself into believing something fake, but rather just to honestly see a situation as realistically as you can over time. And this method is useful in parasitic anger situations. So going back to this bumping example, you judged the event. You felt angry inside. And fortunately for you, you've learned that reappraisals can result in a reduction in angry feelings. It's going to calm a reactive amygdala and really just yield some added benefits as a distancing technique. So you're going to decide here to give cognitive reappraisal a try. So you start by asking yourself, how can I view this situation differently? So this appraisal is going to sound like, you know what, that person wasn't paying attention. And that new view is plausible, and you're probably going to calm down. So you can start developing reappraisal skills using guided reappraisals. So in this example, in this left column, you're going to find questions and sample situations where you can really apply the questions. Then the middle column is going to show you a way of looking at the situations from a different angle. And then this column on the right is for describing the results of the reappraisal strategy. So the first question we can ask ourselves is, what's my price? We can try this in situations where you don't think you can really stand the tension anymore. So I can ask myself, what's my price? If someone offered me $10,000 for every single minute that I hang in here while feeling stressed until the stress lessens, how much could I earn? And the result of that is I still don't like feeling tense, but the tension seems a little bit more tolerable, especially if I'm making $10,000 for every minute. Another question that we could ask ourselves is, what if this is my favorite cousin? How would I react? Would I think differently if this were my favorite but absent-minded cousin? What can I take from the analysis and application to this current situation? Would I be more forgiving there? And, maybe the acquaintance forgot, or they got delayed, or they didn't have a cell phone, or they were in an accident. I still don't like the situation, but I'm going to feel a little calmer. Another question we can ask is, what's my anger angle here? We can try this in situations where your anger might get out of hand. So I can ask, what can I tell myself to cool this anger down a few degrees? And with this scenario, maybe the acquaintance forgot, they got delayed, they were without a cell phone. We don't like the situation, but we feel calmer. Another question is, how can I look at this from another person's perspective? We want to try this in situations where we're going overboard, and maybe we prefer to regain perspective. So I'm going to say to myself, if a wise friend was in the situation representing my interests, how might that friend see and do things differently? Maybe the friend would address the issue directly and honestly at the level that it warranted. And then we can ask, what is my view from a different camera angle? So we can try this when your anger thoughts are accelerating in a conflict situation. So, situations can look different when they're viewed from different angles. So just imagine yourself in a room with multiple computer screens, each showing an area from different camera angles. So you get new information from each angle. So we can look at it from 5 different angles. What are the likely thoughts of the other person? What can I agree to do? What's negotiable? Where do I need to hold my ground? And what is the worst thing that can happen if I walk away to revisit this matter at another time? And by getting these new angles on a situation, we have more options for a better decision-making process. The last question here is, what is going to change with space and time distancing? So we want to try this in a situation where we realize we're too close to a stress situation and we risk losing our objectivity. So, is it possible to imagine yourself 1,000 miles away from the stress event and, reading about the event in last week's newspaper? If every sentence in the article is just objective observations and facts, what is the reader going to say about the event 200 years from now? When we create conditions to get distance from the excess negativity, we're likely to think a little bit more clearly. So the result might be, I found I could create an accurate statement of the situation and, delete the expletives, delete the impressions, delete the beliefs that are cluttering my mind, and conclude that the situation doesn't really warrant the anger and the distress that I'm giving it. And in 200 years from now, that situation wouldn't even made it to the newspaper. So we're going to feel more in command of self, and it's going to feel really good. So we can apply the cognitive reappraisals and distancing methods to reduce the parasitic anger and improve our outlook. But context is important. So think of it like a job. If you avoid improving your work performance or cognitive reappraisal as a standalone intervention, that's insufficient. Doing better on the job is likely to earn you an improved job appraisal. So let's apply what you've learned to your own cognitive reappraisal experiment. Without an initial appraisal that evoked anger, there'd be no need for the reappraisal. So by testing out a variety of reappraisal approaches, you're going to expect to find, some that work better for you than others. And what you're learning through reappraising may lead to more effective first appraisals in the future. So for your homework, I want you to fill out this chart when a situation comes up that makes you angry this week. And by developing reappraisal skills, you're also teaching yourself how to substitute parasitic anger appraisals with more accurate initial appraisals. Reappraisals can have an additional benefit, like improving your chances for long-term physical and psychological health, or lessening tensions that goes with a sense of uncontrollability, or maybe navigating uncontrollable stresses while also avoiding the destructive mental health outcomes. And also just maintaining the effectiveness that you've earned in developing these reappraisal skills. Stephen G. Hoffman is a professor of psychology in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences in Boston University. And as an expert in cognitive behavioral therapy and also the author of the Anxiety Skills Workbook that he wrote in 2020, he's sharing his top tip for distancing yourself from anger. So we know that anger is just this normal human emotion that comes up from experiencing frustration or maybe a violation of, your personal space or your norms. And you can focus anger on a person, including yourself, or maybe you focus it on an object, and maybe it's just a general experience. But you can experience anger at varying levels of physiological arousal. And we know that anger's, it can last a short time period, or we can have like long-lasting resentment. And rage often has this just sudden onset, and it's associated with the perception of a loss of control. But regardless of the type of anger, there's always a stimulus that triggers it. And cognitive appraisal that makes the stimulus personally meaningful, and also always a time course of the emotional response. And once you know what the cycle is, you know where you can intervene to break the pattern. So first we have to step back from our immediate response to that stimulus. Is the stimulus that important to you? Is it personally relevant as you first assumed it to be? Then we step back from our immediate appraisal of the situation. Is it possible that your immediate appraisal of the situation was incorrect? Is it possible that somebody violated your space or norms unintentionally? Were there any contributing factors that might explain or even justify the other person's behavior? And then lastly, we want to step back from our emotional response. You are not your feeling. You are not the puppet of your emotions. Distance yourself from your emotions by observing yourself and your response. Nobody forces you to respond to your feelings. You may not have control over your emotional arousal, but you do have control over your behavior, like what you're saying or what you're doing. So consider the consequence of your actions.